Hey everybody, it's Tripl-L coming in to talk about My Hero Academia chapter 310. Hey everyone. So, first off, if you're seeing this video on the main channel, then great. It means crisis has been averted. If you're not seeing this video on the main channel, it means okay, well, we're probably dealing with a little bit of a problem, but hopefully it'll get solved. And if you're not seeing this on the main channel, I was hoping that it would be solved by the time you saw this video, which it didn't happen. But that's okay. That's okay. These things take time. It'll be solved hopefully within the week or next week, and we'll be back on to the regular stuff. Anyway, let's get into the video proper. So this week we're talking about chapter 310. I got my pages of notes. We got like 4 pages roughly, and I got my general notes. So we'll just step right into it. First point in general notes is I legitimately did not see this coming. I mean, we knew that we were eventually going to get a flashback of the things that happened in the flashback scene that we got in this chapter. The thing here is that it came so quickly. As we were talking about what would come next, like on the live streams and all that, we weren't really sure because last time the author ended off on a point that was relatively open. We could have actually transitioned to a different arc. It wouldn't have been the worst break in the world. But then we came into this one, and ultimately we got another setup chapter. Now I do have some notes at the end specifically about the last page, because the last page is actually the interesting one when it comes to looking at an overarching pattern. But yeah, no, this is a setup chapter. We pretty much got 2 setup chapters in a row. And if you look at the structure of the chapter, it's largely the same thing. It's a little bit of present time and then flashback fill-in. The thing is that we still need a lot of fill-in. So what I think is possible, if we're talking about what comes next, I think it'd be fair to say that we actually maybe have another setup chapter, not next week because of the break, but maybe the week after. Or we could break off. Do I have any kind of like evidence that can give us some kind of idea of the odds for the next chapter? Well, there was one time where the author did 3 setup chapters, not in a row, but 3 setup chapters in relatively quick succession. And those 3 setup chapters ended up leading into the war overall. I wouldn't be surprised if the next issue was another setup chapter, because if we're talking about what flashback we do need a flashback for number 2 and number 3 telling Izuku their quirks, and I'll give my reason for why that has most likely happened already. But yeah, anyway, when it comes to that prediction, there's not really, I don't have a lot of evidence to back up the idea that we'll get a 3rd setup chapter. It's just more of a superstitious rule of 3 type thing. Just because usually when the author is doing this many setup chapters, it's because he needs to get a lot of things out of the way before he goes into a big arc. And that's what this kind of reeks of. It kind of feels like he's setting up for a relatively big arc. Last time he did this, he was able to go into a very small mini arc, which ultimately served as another setup arc. But it was a little bit easier to handle. It was the ending arc in particular. Like, that was a very quick little thing. We might be doing a quick little setup arc after this as well. Anyway, next point I wanted to make is just Banjo is great. Banjo has quite a lot of oomph in the chapter. I like his interactions with Izuku. I like how it's him and Izuku talking. I think Banjo is great for the narrative. I think he tells us some pretty cool things. I never thought I would like Banjo this much, but he's legitimately cool. I think he's a better poster boy for the Vestiges than Yoichi is. Just like he pretty much represents the N and Danger Sense guy and him, that little faction. It's those 3 together, because 2 and 3 are kind of tied with Yoichi, and Nana's tied with All Might. So those would be the groupings, and that's who I think Banjo is the poster boy for, pretty much. But yeah, no, I really just enjoy Banjo. My last point before going into the page-by-page walkthrough is the Bakugo theory is dead. Thank God. That is not Bakugo. I don't care what anyone says. That's not Bakugo. That's not Bakugo going back into the past. Thank God that's dead. That's not Kirishima. Kirishima was part of the Bakugo theory. That's not Kirishima. No way about it. That's not Kirishima. No, look. If you want to make a relationship with Bakugo and say that this guy's related to Bakugo, that's totally fine. It's actually much more likely this guy is related to Bakugo as an ancestor or something like that. Much more likely. And if you're questioning, well, why does he look so similar to Bakugo? Listen, go look at Katekyo Hitman Reborn. Shonen and Katekyo Hitman Reborn in particular has a lot of similarities to My Hero Academia when it comes to Izuku, when it comes to how the Vestiges work, and when it comes to the similarities across generations. Whoever number 2 is, you can just say that he is like the Bakugo to Yoichi's, if you want to say like that. Using a similar face as someone in the past, that's not that strange. Usually when it's done in a work, it's just to say how similar the 2 generations are or something like that. The point here, though, is that the Bakugo theory died with this chapter. Unless the author wants to pull the craziest plot twist, but it's dead. And unfortunately, we also lost the 2 and 3 might have been villains kind of theory that was going around. I don't really mind that. All that really says is like, okay, we're going for a very simple interpretation of what exactly were the Vestiges that came before Izuku, right? They were all people who were standing against All For One. I mean, it might still come out that number 2 was maybe working with All For One at the beginning, because they make that comment about how you don't really realize you're being manipulated by him. So, that could still affect 2 or 3. But for now, we can say like that theory seems to have been walked away from. But the author still has a few plot twist that he can throw in here. Anyway, with that out of the way, let's get into the page-by-page walkthrough. So the first page is an establishing shot. There's nothing of value here that I can talk about. Page 4 is the introduction of the most adorable lady ever in one of the most terrifying situations. People attacking because of the way she looks and the time that she's outside really sucks. Now I will say, when it comes to the translations between the fan translation and the Viz translation, there were quite a few differences. Some panels just completely changed the meaning of what was being said. For this lady, the fan translation had her squeaking, so I'm not really sure where that comes from. I don't know if that's a fan translation thing, but it's not on the Viz translation. Anyway, let's get into the page. Here you can see that this guy's support device is using water. It seems to be drawing moisture from the air. At this page, I'd also like to remind you the thing about the hero license. What the hero license says, the promise of the hero license is that the person who has it has trained judgment. That's what the heroes are more or less graded on. Judgment is what the civilians lack. This has always been the case. And that is what we're ultimately seeing here. These guys are making a faulty judgment call. Much like how Gentle made a faulty judgment call back in the day. Page 5, pretty cool panel. I love the way that Izuku came in on it. If you notice, he also swings on a pole to correct his momentum. So I think the author did great on the choreography on this page. Really slick, like holy crap. It's just so creative with the way he goes from swinging on the pole to coming right up to the viewer. Really neat, really neat. I think that's probably one of the most creative page designs I've seen from him yet. Page 6 is a sad page with civilian vigilantes saying what they said. And now I want to point something out though. See how this woman was judged by her appearance that her quirk makes her take on. And see how these people made the judgment call that she was a villain because of her quirk? Really terrible. But before we talk about the in-universe context, it's important to point out that a good chunk of the My Hero Academia fan base, they do the same thing these guys do. And maybe you already know what I'm about to refer to. I'm referring to the people who very specifically say that Toru is a traitor, with the primary reason being that her quirk predisposes her to being the traitor. And I want to be very clear. If you believe that Toru is a traitor and you have circumstantial evidence, that's different. But if you're saying that she's a traitor primarily, she's got the quirk that makes her a traitor, you're not that different from these people here. What I want to point out here is that judging people by their quirk and attaching villainous qualities to them is not something that is unique to this fictional setting. Still sucks to see it, however, but the situation that we see unfolding here is what would make the Toru being the traitor problematic in universe. Because if the author were to make Toru the traitor especially during this really volatile time, the rhetoric of judging a person by the quality of the quirk and not the content of the character would become falsely justified, with it becoming bolstered realistically within the universe. The idea being, If a civilian found out that Toru was the person responsible for a lot of strife, what would stop that person from assuming that other people with villainous quirks were villains as well? The worst thing about these kind of scenarios is that if that person was ever called out on it, the person could just say, well, yeah, if Yue had adopted that way of thinking, they could have stopped Toru or early on, and maybe we wouldn't be in this mess kind of thing. In this case, the issue is that you don't want to give an example that bolsters the heuristic. I think it's better to not have Toru be the traitor, and I think that's better only because I don't think the author might have time to show the logical ramifications of it. But if he does have time to show the logical ramifications, I really do think it could work. If the author made Toru the traitor, the lesson that he could impart on the readers is, yeah, the assumption is bad to make, but statistically, eventually someone will prove the assumption right, and that will cause representative bias. The challenge of a rational society is to be able to see an example for what it is, just an example, an outlier, not a statistical reality, or not a statistically overwhelming reality. If the author were able to show the nuance of, just because this one person fell to the assumption, it doesn't mean that everyone else is a villain. If he's able to show the nuance of that situation, the Toru thing will work really well. But we live in an era where My Hero Academia goes by relatively fast, so he might not have enough time to be able to do that. And right now, especially with how he depicts the civilized society, yeah, no, it'd be kind of rough. It'd be a little bit of a challenge to justify it. The other thing is, like, if you have Toru on the meta sense being the traitor, like, a lot of people are going to feel really bolstered making assumptions based on people's looks, which it might not be a good message to impart, especially given that assuming someone's quality based on their looks is being frowned upon in this chapter. Anyway, back to the chapter content. It's sad to see people regressing to bad assumptions. What's happened here is that new in-groups and out-groups are forming, and it's reminiscent of the early days of the quirk phenomena. Anyway, on this page also, we have the girl justifying why she was out, and I thought that was actually pretty reasonable. Page 7, cutest page in the world, best panel, I ship it. I ship them. I don't know how old she is, but I'm going to assume she's a teenager, fingers crossed. Anyway, on this page, Izuku says that everyone's scared, giving the civilians a way out, and then he says he's going to make everything go back to normal, which just leads into his thoughts at the end of the chapter, and just kind of says that he's really taking on a lot. Page 8, you have All Might arriving, and he gives Izuku a meal. Also, the girl is surprised that All Might arrived. I'm pointing that out because I think she's just a normal girl and not some weird villain assassin. I'm really hoping she's not an assassin. And actually, like, I started wondering, would Danger Sense trigger if Izuku was talking to Toga while she was disguised? I feel like it should, because Danger Sense would be saying, like, hey, Izuku, this is not the person you think you're talking to. I think it'd be neat if Danger Sense could work that way. Page 9. Is that the Tokyo Tower, whatever it's called? Anyway, on this page, you have Banjo speaking, saying that it's like they slid back in time. I was told that people had confusion about this line, thinking that time travel was going on. No, time travel is not going on. Banjo is just saying this is how things were back during his time. If you recall, I and many others said that the villains were going to end up bringing the world back to... Oh, wait, sorry, not the world. Japan. They were going to bring Japan back to how it looked like during All for One's pinnacle era. And, here we are. On page 11, Banjo clarifies, confirming that he's saying that the world is on edge as much as they were back at the beginning of the quirk phenomena. The next lines, I believe, are Izuku's because of the way that Horikoshi draws Banjo's thought bubble, but that black panel is a little bit tricky. Anyway, I do think it being Izuku justifies the choice in names. So if you notice, Izuku says Shigaraki and All for One in one breath, like the speech bubbles are connected. He separates Dabi, and then he says Nomu and the League. What you have here is Izuku forming 3 distinct groups: the Big Boss, the Peons and the Pawns, and Godforsaken Dabi. The big thing for me is that Izuku separates Dabi from the rest of the League. And honestly, from Izuku's perspective, I guess it makes sense. I mean, he saw Dabi dance close up, and that already is a traumatizing thought in of itself, but he actually saw it, so I can't imagine how much trauma this kid has taken in from seeing that sight. So I get why he would separate Dabi. Dabi's kind of weird. But narratively, these groups may represent how the author himself is going to be dealing with these people. So in this case, there's 3 distinct factors. What it would mean is that maybe the League and Nomu are taken on as one unit, Dabi is taken on as one unit, and All for One is taken on as one unit. What that might look like in manga, it would be maybe there could be 3 distinct squads of heroes being formed for one grouping specifically. So one grouping specialized for Nomu and League, one grouping specialized for All for One, and so on and so forth. But mind you, that's just a quick extrapolation based on the thought bubble and the way that the author presented it. It's not really the strongest guess. Anyway, the rest of the page is Izuku summarizing the situation, and page 11 is Izuku telling us what we already know, while also letting us know that he again tends to stop Shigaraki. Of course, it's worth pointing out that Izuku says I versus we, which might just be further setting up Izuku to have to be reminded of the power of friendship. And yes, we did not get Bakugo in this chapter. I am weeping on the inside, but I'll live. Then the flashback on page 12. The second and the third users are Yoichi's heroes. Page 13, Banjo distracts Izuku while first talks to 2 and 3. On page 14, 3 explains how tough things were. He also makes a comment about how hardcore of a manipulator All for One is. Through him, we also learned that the second was the guy that gathered up a small resistance force to take on All for One. Now, page 15, another interesting page. This had some changes from the fan translation. But on this page, we ultimately get it. During their time, everything was for keeps. And it's cool to hear that second wiped out a lot of people to get to All for One. That could really be used to characterize him. Like, he's pretty much a soldier that went through a lot. So anyway, they used that framing of how hardcore everything was to justify his ridicule of Izuku, which confirms that 2 and 3 were facing away from Izuku because they didn't agree with him, and we once theorized that. So that was cool to hear. I'm going to take page 16 and 17 together because the first user has a very bad line of reasoning. First, he's doing a kind of appeal to emotion, and he's arguing against apples with oranges. First, second user has a problem with Izuku saving their sworn enemy, one of who, Shigaraki, by his own willpower, wants to and has killed many people. Yes, Shigaraki is a bit of a victim, but the full nature of Shigaraki's victimhood is not fully understood at this moment in time, and also, to some degree, Shigaraki is autonomous. Yoichi then says, however, oh, but hey, you saved me. Why'd you do that? And I'm just like thinking, oh, I don't know. Maybe it's because you're not a murderer? Maybe it's because it was easy to see that you were a prisoner? You were behind a door with one of these locks. You looked pretty malnourished and barefoot. You probably also stank. I don't see a shower in there. All this says is that second user, despite being in a life and death situation, isn't a zealot. And he isn't a giant colossal dick. He's capable of rational thought in the most extreme situations. Actually, I really respect second user a lot more now. Look, man, this shouldn't even be a question. He saved you because you weren't a bad person. This was an insane retort from Yoichi. He can understand. Second user can understand the nuance of All for One locked up a guy. That probably means the guy is pretty cool. This actually says more about Yoichi. In what world does he think he's comparable to All for One such that he is deserving of? This is bordering on just irrational treatment. I swear, at this rate, he's going to come out and say that he's guilty because he shares blood with All for One, which is insane. But I wonder if he's leaning into that idea that the sins of the family, the sins of a relative, are the sins of a family. I wonder. Anyway, this is legitimately a dumb argument point, but as emotional blackmail, it really does work. But holy man, I've got no respect for Yoichi's argument skills. All for One clearly got all the rationality, which actually makes kind of sense. Yoichi's, for everything that we've seen of him, he seems to be the more emotional to All for One's logical. The unfortunate thing here, though, is that Yoichi looks way too blinded by his emotions, and it just makes him come off as a little bit stupid. Now, mind you, from the perspective of writing this feels like a little bit of a forced setup because Horikoshi had to justify telling the story of how they met. And like honestly, when emotions get involved, you can actually justify a lot of irrationality, and this is fine. But let's continue dissecting this. On this page, Yoichi gives up on his first approach and instead acknowledges that second doesn't really have a choice regardless. So what Yoichi did is that he had second user cornered. He knew second user was cornered, and still attack them with an argument that doesn't make sense but can deliver a very solid emotional hit. And this is really how emotional people tend to argue. They build a foundation on reality, but then proceed to lob emotional appeals, and then they double back to the point of objective reality they have, as if to say that that objective point somehow justifies the garbage that they mentioned first. The idea being that if you can weaken their defenses and then you throw in something that's like objectively true, the person's gonna be like, well, that is true, and then they'll go along with the last thing they heard after their will has been whittled down or after they've been beaten into submission through the heart. Really, it's bothersome to see, but I do legitimately wonder if this is by design. Like, as in, did Horikoshi actually decide to do that? But at the moment, we don't have enough info yet because I haven't seen Yoichi talk more. But honestly, if you were to tell me that Yoichi is pretty bad at arguments and he relies on emotions and feelings, I mean, that would make sense to me because All For One is really smart. If he wants to create a contrast, it would be a perfect contrast of feeling versus logic. The only unfortunate thing here is that usually people who talk from their feelings in manga tend to be dumb. And I really don't want to see Yoichi going down the being dumb plot line. Unless the author wants to do a deconstruction on the character too, right? If the author makes Yoichi ridiculously self-sacrificing, you might go down there. And honestly, like thinking about it, there's a lot of weird red flags about Yoichi. And when we were looking at the spoilers, someone had mentioned, I think it was White Despair, that he had read a theory that the room that they were in was the room that Yoichi was locked in. Now, you can kind of see the door. It might legitimately be there. And if that is the room where Yoichi was locked in, also look at the things that he's still wearing. Still in the same ratty outfit that he was in when he was in that room. If you think about it, isn't it kind of weird that when you have a mental space, you present yourself in a pretty unappealing look, and you have your meeting space be the prison that you were kept in? That doesn't seem like someone who's being kind to himself. That seems more like someone who's torturing himself, if that is the case. And I know you might say, well, oh yeah, but this is where One for All got started. Yeah, no, it doesn't. That I don't care. I don't care. This is a pretty big statement to turn your prison into your meeting place. That doesn't indicate a healthy mindset. And again, with his own personal appearance, this seems more like a guy that thinks he deserves the things that has happened to him, which would justify the way he talks earlier. We'll have to see if the author wants to do that and give the guy that kind of rhetoric. Because usually, when it comes to heroes, giving a heroic character a rhetoric that makes him feel like he's being too hard on himself, that's typically drawn as a admirable quality because it testifies something. It says something to the quality of the character, to the inner quality of the character. But this is a recipe for like some annoying shenanigans. I really can't handle that line of argument that the guy lobbed that second user at the beginning. Again, this might be by design. Horikoshi has shown that he's particularly good at this kind of stuff. Anyway, point of the matter is, regardless, emotional appeals, even though they're officially recognized as a logical fallacy, they're really effective because most people can relate to emotions more than they can to rational truth. Next, we have the grab the hand image that caused people to ship first and second. Also notice, second has a lot of scuffs on his hands. And then we go to page 19 where the second user is talking to Izuku, referring to him as boy, and we get the line of things are getting faster or whatever. Now, there's a few things to point out here. Let's go very quickly to the guy. If you notice, second user doesn't have a scar when he rescues Yoichi. That kind of indicates to me that he might have gotten that in a fight with All For One afterward. Second thing, a second user has two gauntlets, but in this scene when he comes in, he only has one gauntlet. So that might be indicative of just a lot of fighting going on before. Also, in regards to his quirks, you see that he has something that can be launched out. That might be another similarity to Bakugo. I'm right now kind of thinking if he can just launch fire. I think it'd be cool if he has a fire quirk. Maybe he launches some kind of energy. Maybe he launches some kind of gas that he needs to like ignite with a match or with a device. He might have a beta version of Bakugo's quirk that's now been superpowered, although I think that'd be kind of lame if you just copy Bakugo's quirk. Regardless, he has a projectile type thing that he can launch at people. Who knows what it exactly is, but whatever. I do hope it's some kind of fire or energy throwing kind of thing. I think that would be really neat. Now, Izuku probably won't need the equipment, because if it's an issue of he needs to use the equipment to make the thing stronger, now with One for All it's probably supercharged. Now, more points. So talking about the structure of page 19, if you look at it, page 19, we end with another lineup page. If you look at the previous chapter, look at the final page. That was also a lineup page. So once again, Horikoshi has set up the lineup of people who are going to be involved. Now, mind you, last week's chapter was a metaphorical lineup page, whereas this week's chapter is a quite literal lineup page. Like when you see all of the Vestiges forming alongside Izuku, they're probably actually forming alongside Izuku. What's important to notice here, and this is what says that second and third might have had a talk with Izuku already, is that they're all looking in the same direction. And again, the fact that he's saying boy, that's definitely second user talking to Izuku, if that translation is correct. So they have most likely have talked. We most likely will see that information in a flashback. Because just with the way this looks, just by the logic of what a flashback means, there has to have been a conversation that went between them in the missing period. Next point, we're told very directly things are speeding up. Like, what does that mean for the future? That's actually very concerning, because if Horikoshi is going out of his way to say, like, look, things are going to get fast, it means that plot developments are going to be coming quick as soon as we're out of this setup period, which is a little bit scary because Hero Academia is already very fast. We'll have to see where that goes, but usually when an author acknowledges speed, it's not great for people that like a slow burn like me. And we don't have the names. Oh yeah, we don't have the names of second and third. That probably means we're getting in a flashback. Sorry, that's one of my notes. Overall, yeah, that was the chapter 310 of Hero Academia. Very fun, very cool. It was another fill in the gaps chapter, but we got to see second and third user, so that's pretty great. Now, I have my theory on how we can kind of imagine the pacing of the chapters. But right now, we're going to be moving into another arc once we're done with the setup phase. Second and third probably going to have their quirks revealed, but maybe not activated just yet. We'll have to see where exactly we end up on that one. This chapter also justified why Izuku had En's quirk, because they were talking during that little time that they had, which is totally fine. Any other things that I want to say? Oh yeah, because I might not be able to make the video now that my channel is having those trouble, but I want to ask you guys, because a commenter came to me, Speed, and he told me about just some trouble that he's been having on the internet, and I just want to ask you guys, do you guys think Izuku's a vigilante? Like, I want to know, if there's one of you that actually thinks Izuku's a vigilante, I want to know your reasoning. Because I don't see the logic in saying that Izuku's a vigilante. I mean, in my mind, why say Izuku's a vigilante when you're more likely correct saying Izuku is acting under the authority of the provisional license? It's just, it doesn't make any sense. Izuku is quite literally being monitored by All Might, Endeavor, Hawks, and Best Jeanist. How can you say he's a vigilante? So, like, let me go through my thought process here first. What is it that someone that says that Izuku's a vigilante, what do they want to accomplish by saying Izuku is a vigilante? Do you want to make Izuku seem cooler? Do you want to have a scene where Izuku is chased by the police? Do you want to have a scene where Izuku is chased by pro heroes? Because that's what they do to vigilantes. I mean, go look at vigilantes right now. It just seems so unreasonable to me to call Izuku a vigilante in this time period when he's being supervised by 3 of the top 10 pro heroes. It doesn't make sense. And now, maybe someone will say, well, no, Izuku's not in school, so therefore his provisional license doesn't work. Where has that been said? And are you sure that's how it would work? Because from my perspective, Nedzu has known about All for One and One for All from the very beginning. And right now, All Might, Nedzu's employee, is out with Izuku. you think it's reasonable to think that Nezu has written Izuku off of being in the school, even though he knows they're in a very special situation that revolves around All Might? Isn't it more likely that Nezu is in the know and totally fine with Izuku being out there because he understands the risks involved and the potential gains? So saying Izuku's a vigilante because he's out of school doesn't make sense if the school itself is totally fine with it. It's just overall, this whole idea of Izuku being a vigilante, it doesn't make a lot of functional sense. Izuku's, in this case, Izuku is much more similar to underground hero style Aizawa from Vigilantes, which is still a pro hero, than he is any actual real vigilante. He's still, at the end of the day, what separates Izuku from Mirio, who was able to go out very far away from his main teacher, Night-Eye, and they were able to encounter Shizaki? What separates Izuku from them? Izuku is still being Izuku is still being supervised from a distance. What separates Izuku from Yo and his crew, who were very far away from their pro hero, and they're still on provisional hero license? Yeah, no. When I hear about people calling Izuku a vigilante, it really does feel like those people are chasing a particular factor for Izuku, which really doesn't need to be chased. I sincerely don't think that any self-respecting, important character in Hero Academia is going to call Izuku a vigilante. And if the police call Izuku a vigilante, all it takes is word from either Hawks, Endeavor, or Best Genius, or heck, even All Might, and it'll be solved immediately. Yeah, no, man. It's just so interesting. I would love to know if any one of you think Izuku's a vigilante, because I need to understand how exactly you think. So feel free to let me know down below. Anyway, everyone, thank you so much for watching. Speed, I hope you enjoyed that. Maybe I'll cut that out and make that a little bit of the vigilante video. But yeah, guys, let me know what you thought down below. Until next time, I hope you have an absolutely great day.